Multilinguals, what's your they didn't realize I could understand their language story. I'm born to Russian immigrants. Whenever my family and I travel abroad, we almost exclusively speak Russian and tend to get better attitudes from people when they don't think we're American tourists. When I was 12 or so, we were in a cafe in Belgium and a large group of 20-something guys walk in. My dad gets a worried look on his face, drops his voice and says we are Americans right now. He explained to me later that they were Chechen gang members, at the time when Chechnya was at war with Russia and anti-Russian sentiments were extremely high. I lived in Japan when I was little and retook Japanese in college so I didn't sound like a child when I spoke. To solidify my new language skills, I went to my hometown for about 6 weeks a summer in college. It was a small town so most people remembered me or my family, but some people I stayed with, 6 weeks, 11 families that at least wanted me to spend a night in their home, were new to the area since we left 15 years or so earlier. One of these families had a high school-aged son who wanted to borrow me for his high school's international festival. No problem. I'd go and let other high schoolers practice their English with me and do carnival games and stuff. However, the guy apparently did not get the message that I spoke Japanese and proceeded to introduce me to all his friends as his girlfriend. I let him have his moment for the night, without leading him on, but on the train ride back to his home, he was talking to his friend in Japanese and I joined in on the conversation. Also in Japanese. The embarrassment on his face was worth knowing all his friends thought I was his girlfriend. I was a Mexican living in Germany with a Chinese school-assigned roommate. He claimed to not speak any English and my German wasn't good so we weren't able to communicate. My German roommates then claimed he told them he didn't speak any German, so I gather he was antisocial. I took 3 years of Mandarin in high school, but I didn't try using it on him. About 3 months in, he and another Chinese student got off the bus at the same stop I did and we all walked together to our flat. Heard him talking about me and his friend laughing but held back. Once we got to our flat, I opened the door and told them to please enter in Chinese. I still remember his shocked face. His friend later complimented my Chinese, while a few weeks later my roommate claimed my Chinese was so bad that he couldn't understand me. I seriously think he just wanted no contact with me. Possibly because he never followed the cleaning schedule. I was in New York, and entered one of those electronic stores. I asked the price of an item in English. The guy at the counter turns to another guy who on a ladder stocking items and asks in Hebrew how much he should charge. I speak Hebrew, so I'm following their dialogue. The guy on the ladder looks at me and notices that I am following them with my eyes, then he switches to Arabic. I don't speak Arabic. The counter guy tells me the price in English. I say too expensive in Hebrew and leave. 2 deaf people were in my store talking, signing, sit on me. My sister is deaf. I know ASL. After I got their money, I kindly told them to get the fuck out and ended the conversation with the one sign everyone knows. My wife is Indian and her family speaks Gujarati. I've spent many years trying to pick it up and have found it to be very difficult as there are no great resources that I am aware of to learn it. You just have to listen and try to guess the context. Anyway, over the years I've gotten pretty good, and when my wife's aunt was visiting from India and she went right into my wife about how much weight I'd gained and how bad my diet must be. I understood every word and stopped her about 2 minutes into her rant. Turns out it didn't stop her from continuing. Some workers at an airport restaurant were saying very inappropriate things about my sister in Spanish. The women were criticizing her appearance, arguing with the men, who were saying very inappropriate observations about what she was wearing and what they would do to her. I ordered in Spanish, workers all went silent and looked stunned. I asked detailed questions about the food menu in Spanish, so that they understood I knew everything they were saying. I gave her my credit card, but she never swiped it, and a $40 airport meal was free. So at the end of the day it was a win. I actually have a reverse story. I had to act as if I didn't speak a language. I was going back home after having studied for a while in Uppsala, Sweden, and during the time I spent there, I had the occasion to learn quite a lot of Swedish. Anyways, to go back home, I had to buy a train ticket to Arlanda Airport from Uppsala Central to get to my flight, which was really early in the morning, and I did so, but bought my ticket with the company SJ, Statens Järnvägar. However, the first train that arrived at the station and that was going to the airport was a UL, Upplands Local Trafik, different company, train which I did not buy a ticket for. Worried that I would be late to the airport, I still took the train thinking that they almost never check the tickets, and thinking that my ticket might actually work for that company as well. Well, they did check that day. The controller asks me in Swedish to see the ticket. So I hand it to him and he looks at me and says in Swedish, "Wrong ticket." So I decide to do the dumb tourist and I pointed to my passport and said in bad French accent, "Sorry, I don't speak Swedish," and I explained that I thought this ticket was the right one to go to the airport. He immediately gave me my ticket back and said that it was okay, but to check next time to buy the right ticket with the right company, in English. So I got off without any fine or anything like that because I faked not being able to speak Swedish. I still feel bad about it today. If the controller that met me that day is readying this, I just want to say, tack och för lad. When I was in Romania, as a Hungarian, I went to buy some food in a small town. I didn't know people in the restaurant were ethnic Hungarians, so when I asked for my food in English, the guy shouted a burger for this fucker in Hungarian to the kitchen. I was curious how it would end, so I pretended I didn't understand. When he got me my food and asked for double the price, I said, now in Hungarian, "Look, dude, you can give me that for normal price, or I'm leaving it, but I sure as hell ain't coming back to you motherfaker ever again." I live in Austria, but my dad is from Brazil. All my Austrian aunts and uncles married a Brazilian. My grandparents from my mother's side opened and lead a factory of our family company in Brazil, that's why everyone was there, but some eventually came back to Austria, just like my mom with my dad. Me and my siblings were raised multilingual but lived most of our life in Austria. So once when I was around 10, my mom and me were on a tram in Vienna with my little brother, who was around 2 at the time, in a stroller, and he starts crying, really loudly. Then one Brazilian lady starts speaking really loudly and in an obnoxious tone something in the lines of, "Well, these European folks don't know how to treat their children with love. How can someone be so cold and unaffectionate to a child as to let them scream without taking them out of the stroller and holding them?" We were standing by the way, there was no seat big enough at the time where we could leave the stroller, so, I was getting worried we were doing something wrong. I wanted to comfort my brother and get him out, but my mom stopped me and really loudly said in Portuguese, "Leave him, it is too dangerous to take him out of the stroller while we are standing here and the tram is moving." You could see the woman's face go from red, to white and back to red, get up and get out so fast at the next exit that we just started laughing and my brother ultimately calmed down. Not really exciting, but I find it funny when I think back. I only speak one language but was training this guy on a till a few years ago and there were 2 French girls chatting in French and suddenly he got a huge smile and said merci to the girls. One burst out laughing and the other one turned bright red. Turned out she was talking about how hot she found him. My family is Italian. I don't speak the language but have a pretty good understanding after listening to my dad and Nonna over the years. We went to Italy to visit family and my great aunt was talking about how she was so happy to meet us and she asked her son if we could understand her, and when I said yes she broke into a huge smile and gave me a hug. It was so sweet. I'm an extremely white American man. I was stationed in Korea, and a buddy and I went into a store that was slightly off the beaten path. My buddy was in a different section of the store and found something he liked. He asked the shopkeep how much it was. The shopkeep said, in Korean, "Well, you're an American, so $65, translation and currency exchange provided for ease of reference." I looked over, and saw a sign on the wall that said the exact item he wanted was $40. I approached the shopkeep and asked him, in Korean, how much it cost, to which he replied $40. So I responded, in Korean, why are you charging him $65? He got rather embarrassed and apologetic, offered to sell the item for $35, and gave us each a soft drink for free. This was during the Christmas season. I was walking with my friend to a local bar. There were a few Russians standing outside their home smoking and 1 or 2 had a drink in their hand. As we walk past, a gentleman says, "What are you looking at, handsome guys?" in Russian. It's meant to come off like, "What are you looking at?" I turn around and say, "I completely understand Russian." Suddenly they get cheerful. The gentleman gives me a hug, handshake. I was then offered a drink and cigarettes. It was hilarious, especially to my friend who didn't understand Russian. My old job, a couple of Mexican dudes came in with a fuel injector but they didn't know what it was called in English or Spanish. I asked them what it was for, as in what car it was for, and they looked at each other and spoke in Spanish saying, "This little black kid doesn't know anything about cars, damn it. Ask him if he can speak to a manager," to which I promptly replied to them in Spanish, "I am the manager and I was asking what car is it for." Then back to English I said, "That's called a fuel injector, sir," and they were like all surprised and trying to be chummy with me. I gave them that nice smug "fuck you" smile back. I'm Irish and I'm studying in Spain at the moment. I was in a restaurant the other day with my friend and there was a group of 3 or 4 English guys beside us. My friend and I were speaking in French, so they must have assumed we were French or didn't understand English. They started shouting about how sexy my friend and I were and how I have better tits and she has a better ass. I think they were deliberately using a lot of slang in the hopes that even if we did speak English, we wouldn't know English slang. I do, because I have an English housemate. My friend doesn't speak much English, but I told her what they were saying and started loudly talking, in English, about how there are a lot of English speakers in this city and people should watch what they're saying because they never know who can understand them. They went completely silent and beetroot red. Fucking idiots. Why they would assume that nobody in this city can speak English is beyond me. It's a university town with a high international population. I must have been about 8 to 9, and we were returning from a vacation in Agra. We were traveling by train and there was this lovely family seated in front of us. They were British, I think. My mom was asleep and I was reading Champak, a kid's story magazine in India used to be very popular in the 90s. They were talking amongst themselves and suddenly one of the girls looked at me and said she's so adorable. So instead of doing the proper thing, that is say, thank you, I blushed hard and pretended to go to sleep. If, by chance, you guys are reading this, thank you. That memory still brings a smile to my face. I'm a Black American. My dad was military and stationed in Korea from his late teens to mid-20s. He picked up on the language, and as a child he taught me. It was like our secret language to talk around my mom with. She hated it. Anyway, I went to college with a large Asian population. While me and some friends were in a study room, a group of students came and I asked us to leave so they could use the room. In English, there was no time limit, no sign up, no nothing where they had that right. So I explained that we were here first, why do they want this particular room? Then they start speaking Korean and say something along the lines of course the black bitch is being difficult, they've been here for a while, they need to leave. Maybe we can lie and say the professor reserved it. I respond, in Korean, call be a bitch in English so I can punch you, and everyone in this room knows why. Their faces turned bright red, they couldn't say anything, they just looked at me in shock and then left the room. I went to a psychiatric emergency ward once and asked for help and if they were comfortable to speak English. I understand Danish but have a hard time making myself understandable in it and didn't really feel like an idiot at a crucial time of my life. I stayed there for 4 days without anyone realizing I knew what they were saying about me right in front of me. 2 of the nurses thought I was cute. 1 doctor thought I was lying all the time. A patient thought I was a spy for the staff. A lot happened in those 4 days. It made my stay way more enjoyable than it should have been. Native English speaker studying Japanese here. Before I moved to Japan, I used to work at my hometown's international supermarket. The Japanese customers, that I noticed, anyways, were usually very nice, and one time there was a younger woman who brought in, presumably, her child, and the child said she was hungry and wanted ramune candy. I didn't want them to feel like I was eavesdropping, so after I rang them up I motioned to some ramune candies we had on sale that day which I had placed on my register. Tried to make it seem nonchalant, and the woman decided to chip in and get some. And hey, the kid was happy, so I was happy too. A long time ago, my brother had a habit of making remarks about people in Spanish whenever he got annoyed, frustrated, or just wanted to make fun of someone, kinda like a gossiping schoolgirl. I told him it wasn't cool, not because he shouldn't be talking Spanish in public, but that he shouldn't be using it in such an underhanded way. If he had a grievance that he needed to get off his chest, he should tell them in a language they are likely to understand where we live, English. He kept doing it anyway. One time, we were leaving a major retailer and the store greeter asked to see his receipt before he could exit with the bagged merchandise in the cart. He had a hard time finding where he put his receipt and he got frustrated. He switched to Spanish and said some variety of this old bitch, and the store greeter immediately called him out on it in Spanish. He was like a deer caught in the headlights. I was so happy she did it. He made a weak attempt at reasserting his right to be frustrated at the situation, but you could see he was very embarrassed at having been caught talking trash in Spanish. I love my brother, but I'm glad he stopped doing that soon after. I'm Romanian and an architect, and in Western Europe a lot of construction workers come from Romania. So a few colleagues of mine invited me to this party on a construction site. In Germany we have a celebration once the structure stands, the Richtfest, asking me to basically eavesdrop on the Romanians to find out how work went and if they were bitching about the architects or whatnot. Didn't hear anything negative from the Romanians all night, so as they were preparing to leave, early, right after dinner, I bummed a cigarette off one of them. In Romanian. They were thrilled. Finally, someone could translate between them and the other workers and planners, and they were so proud of their work and so happy to be able to communicate with everyone. So we all, architects, clients, workers, engineers, got hella drunk, smoked a million cigarettes, and had the best time I've ever had on a construction site. My colleagues then reported that the work continued with a lot of new motivation the following day, and good times were had by all. I am Greek but study in Belgium. Greeks are notorious for talking about people loudly when abroad. The language is rare enough that most people, including myself, usually feel comfortable doing that. Only problem with that logic is, there are so many of us around the world, it's generally not a good idea. So I get on the tram one day and there's this woman, 30s, sitting across from me who says to her friend very loudly and in Greek, "What is that supposed to be, a boy or a girl?" Context for non-Greeks: we have a third, neutral gender that we use for objects, animals, or when talking about someone in a very rude and derogatory way. That is what she used, and in a very mocking tone as well. So I very calmly validated my ticket, and as I was walking away I reply, also in Greek, "It's a girl. And it speaks Greek as well." Her face was hilarious. She just made a mortified ah sound and didn't utter another word until she got off a few stops later. I love this story, but it kind of terrifies me as well. I avoid talking about other people, but I do tend to have very personal conversations with my Greek friends in public places, confident that nobody understands, even after being myself proof that it's not very safe. For context, I'm Vietnamese, born in Canada. I don't apparently look Vietnamese, so people in the homeland always assume I am of another Asian descent. Anyway, I was vacationing in Vietnam with my family and it coincided with my friend's trip to Vietnam. My parents suggested I bring them to a foot massage parlor for a nice and relaxing time, so I did. My two friends were also born in Canada. One of them is Chinese and the other is Korean. We speak in English to each other. We definitely look like a group of tourists. Consequently, we were served in English. During our massages, the masseuses were having a conversation amongst themselves in Vietnamese, a language in which I am fluent, but not fluid. They were trying to figure out our nationalities when one of them said she thought I looked Japanese. Her coworker then said she thought I was ugly. I was pissed, but I kept my trap shut and just kept my cool. When the massages were over, the masseuse who called me ugly ended up being the one who rang us up at the cash. She spoke to me in English, asked how the experience was, what the total was, yada yada. I stared her straight in the eyes and proceeded to tell her, in Vietnamese, that it was great and that my friends and I very much enjoyed the experience. She was visibly flustered and offered us some fruit on our way out. I just smiled, dropped a fat tip on the counter, and left.